Hello, health champions. Today we're going to talk about cortisol, stress, and weight gain, but also about why weight gain might be the least of your problems. A lot of people are aware of and talk about stress, but when they do that, they usually talk about a feeling that they have. Something like that they're feeling busy, they're feeling overwhelmed, they're feeling powerless, they have so much to do, they don't know how to get it all done. And while all of that is indeed stress, we need to understand that it's not primarily about the feeling that we have. And most of the stress you can't feel. What stress really is a stress response. It is how your nervous system responds to something in your environment. And the reason we can't feel it most of the time is that it's a conditioned response to all the different things, the events that we encounter during any day. And these could be external, something that we run into, something that someone else does, but most of the time it is more of the internal stress. It's our internal dialogue. It's our internal way of responding and thinking and acting. And another reason that we may not be aware of all this stress is that it actually starts in utero. This conditioning starts even before we're born. A lot of people are concerned with weight gain, and there is a strong connection between stress and cortisol, because cortisol is a stress hormone, and the purpose of cortisol is to increase blood sugar. Whenever we're stressed, when we're in a fight-flight response, your body is looking for emergency fuel. And there is always a balance of fuel between fat and glucose, but when we're stressed, we're shifting that toward glucose. So now that cortisol stimulates what's called gluconeogenesis. Even if we don't have anything to eat, then the body starts making more glucose. And there's two primary sources for that. One is that we start breaking down glycogen that the body has stored for a reserve purpose to make extra glucose. And the other is that if we don't have enough glycogen, like if we are doing a long-term fast and we are done, we've used up the glycogen, but then we're stressed at the same time that we're having some emotional or physical stress, now we might actually start breaking down protein as a backup source. And we could be breaking down muscle if this is chronic. So a lot of people with chronic stress and chronic cortisol problems, you'll find that they have that big belly, the skinny legs, and the flat butt. And part of that is that the cortisol is breaking down the muscle to try to make more glucose. But the primary reason for cortisol is to raise blood sugar. And in doing that, it also stimulates more insulin. We can do studies where we inject people with cortisol, or a popular medication is corticosteroids. And what happens now is people's blood glucose goes up and they become insulin resistant. Another thing that cortisol does is it increases cravings, because yes, it can make some glucose through gluconeogenesis, but of course the even faster way is if you can eat something. And if you get cravings and there is a vending machine on the corner, now that's an even faster way to bring up that glucose, even if there's no glycogen around. But here's a slide that you really need to understand about what the stress response really is. So we often talk about the stress response as the fight-flight response, and that is correct. So we have the fight-flight and we have the feed-breed. And that is sometimes referred to as the 4 F's. That's an easy way to remember it: fighting, fleeing, feeding, and procreation. And when we have a fight-flight response, one of the first things that happen is you get a pupil dilations. Your eyes are trying to let in more light, because if you're being chased, if there's an emergency, if there's a crisis, and you need to evaluate the environment quickly, then you need to take in a lot of light, a lot of information. Now, you're not going to see it as clearly. You're not going to have that precise focus and clarity, but you don't need that. You just need to see large shapes and objects. The next thing that happens is that your heart rate goes up, because if you're in a fight, then you need to be able to run and make a lot of energy. So the heart rate increases to pump more blood. Another thing that happens is the stress hormones create a vasoconstriction. It's primarily the adrenaline, also called epinephrine, that constricts blood vessels, and now the heart is pumping harder against tighter blood vessels, so now the blood pressure goes up. And that's a good thing in fight-flight because it makes the blood move much faster. And then, like we talked about, the blood sugar also goes up. So first we have the adrenaline, second we have the cortisol that comes in very, very shortly thereafter. Because if you're in a fight-flight, you're not just going to want immediate energy, you want some fuel to sustain that fight. And also in a fight-flight situation, you're much more likely to get injured. And if you get injured, now you might start bleeding, and then the body wants to be able to stop that bleeding quickly. So it anticipates and prepares just in case, and it increases the blood clotting. And part of that blood clotting cascade is cholesterol. So you're going to down-regulate the reuptake of LDL cholesterol. So the receptors get down-regulated, and this is one more factor that contributes to high LDL cholesterol. And then there's the other side of the equation, and we need to understand that this is about resource allocation, that there's only so many resources in the body. So when we send more resources one way, then we have less resources left over for something else. So in a fight-flight situation, we're going to increase these, and therefore we're going to have less of the feed-breed. So digestion is handled by feed-breed. So now we have less of digestive function. We have less immune function. We have less reproductive function. And all of this makes perfect sense, because when you're being chased by a bear, you're not so concerned if you're digesting that little last piece of lettuce. You're not so worried about a microbe inside of you because there's this big bear chasing you. And also reproduction, obviously this is not the time to reproduce. And the feed breed also handles healing and DNA repair. So we're going to have less healing and DNA repair as well. But here's a point I want to drive home really, really strongly. And I want you to really pay attention and get this so you can explain it and you can understand all of those different factors. That this is like a seesaw. We have the sympathetic on one side and the parasympathetic on the other. And any time that one goes up or down, the other one goes the other way. It's the way it has to be. We are hardwired in the brain and the brainstem. This is the only way that it can happen. And why is this? Because the sympathetic, the fight-flight, is concerned with survival in this moment. And the feed breed is concerned with optimal function long term. But if we don't survive this moment, then there is no long term. And that's why the sympathetic has to kick in a split second, and why it takes over and kind of flattens all the other responses, because nothing else is important if there is an emergency. Another way of thinking about this is like a gas pedal, that you can't speed up and slow down the car at the same time. You're going to have to choose. And in terms of how important this is, how it affects this resource allocation, another way of thinking about this is like a faucet. That if you have a faucet that one automatically turns on when the other turns off and vice versa, then any time that you turn on your fight-flight, you're going to turn off the feed breed. And I know I'm saying this many times, but it's that important. If you understand that this is about resources, and any time that you have a stress response, then you're going to turn off the parasympathetic. And if these stress responses are conditioned from before birth and we're not aware of them, and we all have some sympathetic dominance, some stress dominance, then to the degree that we have more of the fight-flight, we're going to chronically have less of the feed-breed. And we need to have a balance of these. One is not bad and the other is good. But when we get into chronic dominance, now we are chronically deficient in digestion, immune system, reproduction, healing, and DNA repair. And for some people, this imbalance can tend to get really, really stuck and manifest certain ways. And now these people get diagnosed with fancy words like dysautonomia, which simply means that the autonomic nervous system has two branches, the fight-flight and the feed-breed. And the autonomic nervous system balances these two. And when the autonomic nervous system doesn't do a good job, then we have dysautonomia, meaning the regulation is off. Another example would be Raynaud's syndrome, which is where people have extremely cold hands and feet to the point where their fingers and their nails turn white and blue. But realize that that is nothing more than an extreme version of sympathetic dominance. They just have chronic vasoconstriction. So now that vasoconstriction is so tight it doesn't allow the blood flow to get out to the extremities. But let's try to get an understanding of how common this is. So again, a sympathetic dominance, that's just the branch that drives the fight-flight response. And we all tend to have a little bit of chronic increase there just because of the world we live in and our lifestyle. This is responsible for the vast majority of our chronic degenerative disease. So let me give you some examples. When we have heart arrhythmias, that can definitely be caused by sympathetic dominance. What do we get? We get beta blockers, incredibly common medication. When we have high blood pressure, hypertension, now we get blood pressure medication. We get more beta blockers, we get diuretics, etc. When we have hyperglycemia, high blood sugar, when that's chronic, that is prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, now we get medication like metformin and insulin. And when we have a tendency for blood clotting, then of course we get blood thinners. And if you realize that this is associated with the cardiovascular disease, with the metabolic syndrome, you see how common this is, that most medication prescribed are in these categories. And there is a component, not the only reason, but there's a strong component of stress in that mechanism. Another example of what can happen is insomnia. Millions and millions of people have trouble sleeping, and part of that can be racing thoughts, because when we're stressed, we tend to be unable to turn off that racing thoughts. But also, whenever we have increased cortisol, then that cortisol actually turns off the melatonin. And the melatonin is the hormone that regulates your circadian rhythm, your sleep-wake cycle. But anytime we have higher cortisol, that's going to turn off that melatonin. That's what it's supposed to do. That's how we can wake up in the morning, and that's appropriate. But if it happens all the time and we can't get into a good rhythm of sleeping, then obviously that's not good. When we have a decreased immune function, now we're more susceptible to colds and flus. There are certain people who get colds and flus all the time. And again, stress is not the only factor, but it is a huge factor. And then let's look at what happens on the other side. We have sympathetic dominance. If we have too much fight-flight, we're going to have not enough feed-breed or parasympathetic. So digestion is 100% regulated and controlled, and the resources are provided when the parasympathetic nervous system is working. So when this is decreased, now we have less digestive function, and things like GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease. There's two reasons for this. One is that we're not producing enough stomach acid. And the second is that the parasympathetic also controls that little sphincter valve at the top of the stomach, between the esophagus and the stomach. And if we can't tighten that up because we have reduced parasympathetic, now that acid can backflow. We can also get things like ulcers because we don't have the proper pH. So there's a bacterium called Helicobacter pylori that thrives when we don't make enough stomach acid. Constipation, the peristalsis, the movement of food through the digestive tract, is also produced by the parasympathetic. Irritable bowel syndrome is when we have alternating constipation and diarrhea, when the stomach frequently gets upset. And again, this is typically when we have an inconsistent parasympathetic function. And also bloating and SIBO can be caused by this because we don't get the proper bacterial flora when we're stressed. And also there's another sphincter muscle, another valve called the ileocecal valve that's also regulated by the parasympathetic. And if we don't have that close up properly, now we can get backflow of bacteria from the colon to the small intestine and get the small intestine bacterial overgrowth. We can also get malabsorption, that we're not absorbing the nutrients properly. We think we're eating the right food, but we're not really absorbing it. We're not really digesting it because we're not healing the microvilli on the intestinal membrane, and we're not making enough stomach acid, and we're not making enough digestive enzymes to break down the food. And it's kind of interesting when it comes to dietary advice because 99% of the focus is on what you eat. But maybe we should put more of the emphasis even on how you feel when you eat than the quality of food. Because there's some people who try so hard to eat the perfect food and yet they have all sorts of different problems. And maybe it is because they're stressed, because their parasympathetic nervous system isn't working well enough to digest this perfect food. Whereas some people seem to do really well no matter what they put in their body. So maybe they can break down the food and utilize it, whereas if you're stressed, it doesn't really matter what you eat. And by that, of course, I don't mean that you should eat garbage, but even the high quality food may not be enough if you can't digest it properly because you don't have enough parasympathetic function. And like we said, it affects your immunity. You might get more frequent colds and flus, and it can be more far-reaching with the microflora, your microbiome, because a lot of your immune system, a lot of your immune function comes from there. And if you don't have a good parasympathetic, if you're stressed, you're not going to get the variety of that flora. And you also may be losing some of your cancer defense because the parasympathetic is responsible for producing your cell-based immunity. And if you can't make those killer T cells, that you may have a reduced ability to identify and wipe out some early stages of cancer. Also these days, have you noticed in the last several decades how infertility has become a big deal? It's incredibly common. There's an infertility clinic on every corner, and people spend thousands, tens of thousands of dollars on this. And it could be contributing to irregular periods. It could be contributing to the inability to carry a child to term, called a miscarriage. It could also contribute to low sperm count, low quality. And of course, we probably all have heard how stress can contribute to erectile dysfunction. And we could also get reduced amounts of healing, reduced capacity to heal. So that could be poor wound healing, but it could also be that your organs don't repair the way they're supposed to. So if you have a kidney infection or some liver problems, then that tissue doesn't regenerate as quickly. And if your gut isn't healing, then you might end up with a leaky gut. You could have food particles get out in the bloodstream, cause food sensitivities, contribute to autoimmunity, and so on. And stress can also cause reduced ability of DNA repair. So normally, the DNA can repair itself. Whenever we have an error in replication, little mistakes can be repaired. But if that doesn't work, now we have problems like premature aging or even more predisposed to cancer. Because some of these mistakes, if they're not caught, they could escalate and turn into cancer. But the body normally has a way of finding and dealing with a lot of this stuff. So how do we handle this? Well, there's two factors involved in managing stress, in really dealing with the root cause. Because most of the time when people talk about managing stress, they're talking about reducing their workload, about looking away from the real world, just try to cut it out. But realize it's not about the outside world. Yes, it contributes, but it is about how you are conditioned, how you habitually respond to it. That's the stress response. And it's not about how you feel most of the time. So there are two factors involved with this. One is to have a strong frontal lobe, the strong frontal portion of the brain. And the second is to work on your wiring. And the frontal lobe is super important because a strong frontal lobe is what turns off that stress response. Like we said, when you have an emergency, it will save your life if you can react to things. But then when the danger is over, something needs to turn that response off so that we can relax and get back to balance. And the thing that turns that off is the frontal lobe. So the better the frontal lobe works, the more firing power we have in the frontal lobe, the better we can manage those responses. And the second thing is about how we're wired, how we're conditioned. So I want to introduce the concept of brain frequencies. And they start with the delta, which is very nice and slow. That's from 0.5 to 4 hertz, which means the brain cell on average is firing 0.5 to 4 times per second. And these frequencies are very important because we can get stuck in different frequencies based on our wiring and conditioning, and they represent different activities and different emotional states. So delta is when we're sleeping, theta is between 4 to 8 hertz, and that is when we're half awake, basically. It's when you're almost falling asleep or almost waking up, but you're not quite awake or quite asleep. Alpha is when you are fully awake but very relaxed. You're not doing very much. It's a great learning state. If you can be alert and very relaxed, that's when you learn the best. And interestingly, when you meditate, then you typically try to get down to the border between theta and alpha, right around 8 hertz. And even more interestingly, that is also the frequency of the Earth's electromagnetic field. So it's a frequency that we're conditioned to. And then we have something called beta. There is low beta, mid, and high beta. So low beta is from 12 to 15 hertz, also sometimes called sensory motor rhythm. And now we are fully awake. We are still relaxed, but we're a little more engaged. It's like a confident. You're engaging in something, but you're not sort of stressed about it. The next step is mid-beta, 15 to 20, and this is where we function the best, when we're active. So now when I'm standing here and explaining something, I am hopefully in mid-beta. We are awake, we're getting things done, we're focused, but we're not really stressed about it. And then we get into the high beta, between 20 and 28. And the higher we get into beta, now we start shifting into the bad type of stress, more into anxiety. Yes, we might get some things done, but it's really wearing on us. And we'd be much better if we could get down into the mid and the low beta. And then the highest brain frequency is gamma. That's between 30 and 100. And there's a lot of discussion about this because on the one hand, it seems like this could also be states of anxiety, but in some cases where people meditate, like monks who spend a lifetime meditating, they have off the chart amounts of gamma, so it can also represent peak states of consciousness and even enlightenment. So all of these different frequencies are always present, they're all good, but what's important is that the brain has the ability to switch from one to the other. So when we're supposed to sleep, we're supposed to have delta. When we're supposed to be awake and relaxed, it's supposed to be alpha, and so on. The problem happens when we get stuck, when we do so much of something, when we're in a particular state so much that we don't know how to get out of it. The brain basically just gets into the habit of doing that. And when that happens in the high beta, this is where we have chronic stress. And sometimes then what happens is because we spend so much time there, we burn it out essentially, and then it starts flatlining. And now we're like walking zombies that even though our eyes are open, we're basically just in delta and theta because we can't switch these things. And one of the best ways to deal with this and help the brain get more flexible is called meditation. And I talk a lot about meditation, and I think it's fantastic, and I think you should all do it. But here's the problem, that the people who need it the most, they aren't really good at it. And it's very difficult for people to learn. And the ones who need it the most, they have the least amount of patience and focus and attention span. So it's like they try it and they can't even get 5 seconds of silence. So it's a very long and tedious process. So most people, they try it and then they quit. And even if you have the determination to stick with it, it could take years to gain the kind of proficiency that really makes a difference. But there's also something called brain tap. And this is not a 100% substitute, but it's a fantastic tool to accomplish a lot of the same things. And let me say, by the way, this is not a paid promotion. The Brain Tap company is not paying me to do this, but I'm using it myself now more regularly, and I've learned a lot just in the last year that I'm super excited about it. And I think for a lot of people who have made changes, they've changed their diet, they try to exercise, but they still are not really feeling any better. They might have lost the weight, or they may not even have weight to lose, but they're just not feeling great. Then I think that the stress, the emotional aspect of health could be the thing that is not getting addressed, and I think this could make a huge difference. So very simply put, Brain Tap works through something called brain entrainment. And one of the principles is called a frequency following response. So if somebody touches you one time, then there is one signal, there is one impulse that is traveling to the brain. So one stimulation creates one brain response. Now you can do that with touch, you can do it with sound, you can do it with light. And this headset uses light and sound in various frequencies. So if you play a light, if you blink a light and you play a sound at certain frequencies, then you have the stimulation and the response. If you stimulate something 1 time per second, you get 1 response per second. If you stimulate something 10 times per second, you get a response 10 times per second. That's called a frequency following response. So now they can jog the brain. They can kind of induce, very, very gently and safely, induce different frequencies and help the brain break out of those stuck states. And the session is anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes. And through that session, it takes you through these different frequencies. So it kind of jogs your brain, it speeds it up, it slows it down. And in doing that, it helps the brain get more flexible. And here's the biggest difference to meditation is meditation, if you're not super focused, it doesn't really do much for you. With this one, even if you fall asleep, it still works the same. And this probably makes really good sense to you, but it didn't really hit home with me until I had a way to measure it. So these are different scans. You measure heart rate variability, and then through very complicated calculations that I don't understand, they come up with all these different markers. And here is about the harmony and the symmetry in brain communication, the balance between the left and the right, and how the different parts of the brain are talking to each other, the coherence, if you will. So this is actually done on the same day. This is Thursday, February 9th, but one of them is at 10:40 and one is 39 minutes later. So they just had time to run the scan, put on the headset, and then redo the scan. And you can see how they had an index number that went from 38, and we would like to be at least between 50 and 100, and after a single session, it went to 62. But you can also see how the symmetry here, it's just all over the place. And then after a single session, it became very, very harmonic, very symmetrical. But like anything else, we can make some quick changes sometimes, but it's like a skill that this has to be entrained. It's something that we need to do over and over, pretty much on a daily basis for this to stick. But then once we have really trained the brain, then we can maintain it with less. And here's another indicator that they call the emotional state, and it went from 28 to 60. And basically you can see on the scale here, dark and red is bad and blue and green is good. But this one really blew me away because it also makes an assessment of how well your brain is performing relative to your age. So at the time of the test, this person was 52 years old, but their brain was behaving like a 53-year-old on average. And then after a single session, the 52-year-old person, their brain was now behaving as someone 10 years younger. And we know today that stress is a component of virtually every health condition. So I think this is a great way to address that emotional aspect. And if you'd like to get your hands on one, I'm going to give you some links, but realize that we're doing a giveaway. We're going to give away 3 of these headsets. And we have the giveaway started April 21st, and it's going to go through May 1st. So when this video drops, you still have 4 days to participate in this giveaway. And here's the cool part. There's 3 grand prize winners. The headset retails for $647, and then there is some software with hundreds of different sessions that you can run. That is $180 for a year. So that's $827, and we're giving away 3 of those. So in total, we're giving away over $2,400. But here's the best part. The more you refer, the greater your chance of winning. So you can basically earn one of these. The first winner is going to be pulled at random. But the other 2, the number 2 is going to be the person who refers the most people into the drawing. And the 3rd winner is going to be the person who referred the number 1 winner. Now, if this number 1 winner wasn't referred, if they just entered for themselves, then that 3rd prize goes to the person who referred the 2nd most people to the drawing. So get right to it and tell everyone you know about this so that they can win and so that you can earn your prize. Now, if you don't win, we're also going to have some of the deepest discount ever on this set because it's going to be a sale, and we'll give you all that information down below. You can just follow the links. If you enjoyed this video, you're going to love that one. And if you truly want to master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure you subscribe, hit that bell, and turn on all the notifications so you never miss a life-saving video.